everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Now today I am delighted, honoured, thrilled to be joined by Fergus Connolly. Fergus, thanks so much for coming on the Sports Psych Show.
Dan, thank you very much for having me.
Now, I would imagine most of the audience will know who you are. But for those who've been, I was going to say living under a rock for the last few years, but that's actually quite rude, isn't it? So for those of you who don't know who you are, Fergus, tell us a little bit about who you are, where you've been, and what you're currently doing.
Well, it's a really interesting question to answer, because I've kind of ended up where I am by accident. I started off playing Gaelic football in Ireland, if my accent didn't give it away. I wasn't a particularly great athlete. I started playing late, and in order to improve and to catch up with all of my teammates, I would just study and read everything that I could at the time about speed, strength, whatever. Meanwhile, I went to university to become a construction studies and woodwork teacher, actually. And while I was at university in Limerick in the south of Ireland, I would just save money, travel and read, and travel to learn from different coaches about, whether it was strength, speed, nutrition, psychology, whatever I could. And it was just a hobby of mine. And I ended up then, after I had my PhD done, which was in computer optimization, I ended up at Bolton Wanderers one time, and shortly afterwards, Big Sam left. They had a whole sports science department. There was a guy called, it was Sammy Lee, and was there. And anyway, I ended up getting offered a role. And 15 years later, after, working at Welsh Rugby, at the San Francisco 49ers, at Michigan football, consulting for Blackburn, Bolton, Liverpool. I just have been trying to help teams win and solve problems for the last 15 years. And maybe someday I'll go back teaching.
And recently you've started to write books. What got you into writing books?
Well, when I started out, I thought, okay, I wanted to know, how do you make people better? So it was obviously at the time strength and conditioning. So I studied everything so I thought strength and conditioning was the key. And then I realized, okay, there's nutrition, and then there's psychology. So because I didn't train as a kinesiologist or a strength coach or a sports scientist in one traditional way, to me this was just fun. I just wanted to find the answers to problems. I just solved problems, and I would just steal ideas and pull them together to simply solve problems. Yeah. And as I was doing this, I would come up with my own models or understanding. So how could I explain how, nutrition would impact strength and conditioning? And then I started to realize, well, nutrition impacts psychology, but then hang on a second, psychology influences physiology as well. So in order to help me understand it, I would create models to help myself interpret and pull all of these things together. And over the years, I had manuals, these little black notebooks that I sketched out these diagrams, and that's why I wrote, I think it's 2-3 years ago, I wrote Game Changer, which was the first attempt to pull everything together across all of the different sports. As I was writing that, all of these little anecdotes and stories would come back to me, and I wrote 59 lessons last year, which was really just a way to thank all of the different people who've helped me on my career, share the stories, but also I wanted to lay down a kind of a little bit of a roadmap for the next generation coming through, because I think one of the challenges we have in the industry is we've got a lot of perhaps self-proclaimed gurus or people maybe who take some more credit than they should, or a false humility. And I wanted anyone who would read anything that I've ever done to know, listen, I'm the world's greatest thief. I've stolen or borrowed or taken ideas from so many other people who are far greater than me. Now, if I can take credit, the only thing I'll take credit for is pulling it together into a way that makes sense to me. But I've learned from some wonderful people, And that's who I wanted to thank, and that's why I wrote 59 Lessons, was to show to the next generation coming through, don't become a specialist, learn across multiple areas, learn from all of these wonderful people who have gone before us. And I wanted to introduce them to some really bright people, names of bright people who have been very, very kind and generous with their time, to me, people like Mike Boyle, Dan Paff, Charlie Francis, whoever, all of these great coaches. Even like I give the example of Sir Clive in giving up a morning to talk to some strange Irish guy, and people, I talk about Clive Woodward, people, he's like Marmite, to some people I'm sure have perceptions of him. I know what people in Ireland would think of him, but I randomly emailed him, and he gave up an hour or two of his time and had breakfast with me one morning. Incredibly generous and open. And people don't see that side of him, or perhaps don't appreciate the kind of person he really is. So, I wanted to give that side to some of these great coaches who have gone before us.
Well, we're going to focus on 59 Lessons, but just my own comment about some of the things you've just said there. It's really interesting, Fergus. I've started to realise in many respects that my role as a sports psychologist is, okay, it might be varied, but one thing I found is becoming more of a sense maker for coaches. Obviously, for me, it's a sense maker around the psychological side. So, it might be throwing some psychological terms out there. It might be connecting individual zone of optimal functioning with attribution theory, with self-efficacy theory, and just trying to help coaches make sense of the literature out there. And that's there's several things I love about this book. It's called 59 Lessons, Working with the World's Elite Coaches, Athletes and Special Forces. And, firstly, I love a book where you can dip in and out of things. And it's not there's a linear element to it, and it's compartmentalized, but you can go on to page 64 and you could get something from page 64, and then you could skip to page 190 and get something from there. So I love that, because that's the way I like to read. It probably says a lot about me as a person, which probably isn't all great. I also, as I was going through it, I thought, wow, Fergus, you have done some air miles going to see people, that's for sure. I mean, fair play to you, mate. And I love, there's so many great people that you mention in this book. And I know you're sort of alluding to standing on the shoulders of giants. But many great stories and so many great people, which is brilliant. And then as you're saying there, and it makes sense to me, it makes sense to me that you're, in many respects in your work, as much a sense maker as anything else. Would that be a fair thing to say?
Yeah, I probably hadn't thought of it like that. I think at my core, I love helping other people fulfill their potential or find contentment, happiness, and not necessarily win, because if you do your best and you lose, you have to be able to accept that. And so it's really, it's making sense, it's problem solving. And what's really interesting are, you work in an industry where everybody thinks that they have the one magic hammer that they can see a nail. And, the longer you stay in the industry, the more you realize this is complex. This is not a one size fits all. And, we've both been around older coaches who we appear very stoic, and it's only later in our career we realize the reason they're so stoic is they realize there's not just one solution, and it's really about interpreting all of the different elements and helping direct people. And you made an interesting point as well from a mental skills or a psychology perspective, whatever term you want to use. It's helping coaches optimize their performance, and helping contribute. It's like It's like cooking. You're contributing salt or flavour to a dish to help make it better, but you're not necessarily, hitting it hard with some major thing. So it's being aware of that and being able to do that is important, I think.
And in many respects, there's 6 ingredients in your. If we're going to carry on with the cooking analogy here, there's 6 ingredients in your 59 lessons. Winning habits, technology and communication. So these are the sections essentially: winning habits, technology and communication, teamwork and culture, management, facilitation and leadership, innovation, resilience and knowledge, and then finally humility and people. So let's begin at the beginning, and I could talk to you about these things all day. So we'll try and keep things moving. But and I could certainly talk to you about the first one, which is winning habits all day long. And you start with. I mean, we can't go through each lesson because it would take too long. But I'd like to. But lesson 1 is be compassionately ruthless. Balancing people management with ruthlessness, which I think was. I mean, you must have come across so many coaches in your career who, would you say coaches are good at getting that balance between ruthlessness and people management, or do you think that's something they really have to work on?
A number of years ago, I gave a talk in Australia to the Australian Football Coaches Association, and I had the opportunity of working in Premier League soccer, international rugby, the NFL, and had audited actually an AFL team. And what's really interesting when you work across Europe, the States, and Australia is the influence of sport on society and society's influence on it. And everybody holds up the NFL or the NBA as being the gold standard. But when you work in the US, you realize that professional sport in the US is not sport, it's not performance. It's pure entertainment, and the driving force behind that is money. And then you go to Australia or Ireland as an example where the majority of the sport is amateur and it's heavily influenced by society. In the UK, I think it's a little bit in between at the minute.
Yep.
But I am getting to a point here. But the original role of sport was to raise our young people. Whether it's in Wales or whether it's in Edinburgh or whether it's in Surrey, it's to raise our young people to live, good, fulfilled lives. But when we reach the extreme end of that and it becomes about entertainment, now raising people to live good lives becomes secondary to making money. And this really, this core question is what dictates whether a coach is compassionately ruthless or they're just ruthless. And coaches who are just purely driven by wins and losses are just absolutely ruthless. They've got very little compassion. But those coaches who understand and see the bigger picture, who are self-aware, who see all of their players as humans, as people, those are the ones who've got that compassionate ruthlessness. And, there are stories of, Kenny Dalglish, for example, at Liverpool, after Hillsborough, and you had, even there are a great many stories. I don't know if you ever have read the letter that Sir Alex wrote Cantona after he left. There are examples of very successful coaches who have found that balance of being compassionately ruthless. And I think that leads to sustained success rather than coaches who are just absolutely narcissistic or sociopathic or ruthless. I've worked for one of those as well, so I know what they're like. But when you look at, and this is what's really interesting, is the coaches who are, and the people who have that compassion and balance between compassion and ruthlessness have a more balanced life themselves and a greater sense of contentment. Those coaches who are narcissistic or sociopathic just leave a life of chaos, a personal trail of chaos behind them. Mm-hmm. That's my experience.
And from that experience, who's been, if I can slightly put you on the spot if you don't mind, who's been the coach that you've worked with, or if you prefer, met with, that demonstrated that balance the best?
I was very impressed by Kenny Dalglish. I only met him briefly a few times. Sam Allardyce. What's interesting as well are they are very often the coaches that you would least expect. When people talk about Big Sam, people have an impression, or there are one or two stories that have been promoted or widely read about him. But I've heard numerous stories from players. He's been very kind to me and generous to me in his time. He'd send me an email from time to time. These are people who, the public just know of stories that they read, but they don't know about the things that they've done for other people, or the generosity, and how they've helped young players or players who didn't quite make it. The coach that is impressed is Coach Jim Gavin, who I read about in 59 Lessons. And by the way, I don't care if nobody buys the book. I just wanted to write the book to share the story. So it's not as you know, you don't make money on a book. So it's Jim was in the Air Force, Irish Air Force, and he's now works for the Aviation Authority. But one of the smartest and best coaches I've ever been around. I think there are a number of people in the military community as well who I've been fortunate to work with, who, because of their life experience, have a wonderful understanding of that compassionate ruthlessness that's needed to survive in life and in the world that we live in.
Do you think, from your experience of working in all those sports, working with some of the best coaches in the world, talking with some of the best coaches, do you think that capacity, that human capacity, the psychosocial capacity, can override a sporting intellect? If the sporting intellect isn't quite there, isn't what I mean. You've used an example in Sam Allardyce. Now, I don't know Sam at all, and I wouldn't be so presumptuous as to know anything about his tactical ability or anything like that. But I think the perception from the public is that he's a man of the people more so than he is a man of shrewd tactics. Possibly. That's not me. I'm hypothesizing that. But it sounds to me like you're saying that actually that those people skills and the psychosocial skills can override that lack of sporting intellect, perhaps.
In my opinion, absolutely. Like take Sir Alex Ferguson. Yeah. I don't know how many years he had a bar in Edinburgh. Or was in Aberdeen? I forget. But the guy developed psychosocial skills or interpersonal skills, whatever you might want to call it, in a bar in Scotland. It's not a wine bar in the middle of Paris. You know what I mean? So we're talking about a difficult environment, and this is one of the challenges that you've got with young coaches coming through today. Yes, they start university earlier. Yes, they've got a one-track mind. Yes, they specialize. Yes, they can pull references left, right, and center about isometric contractions or myofascial release or whatever it might be. Brilliant. But Big Sam went around Limerick in Ireland for his first job, collecting money door to door in Limerick City, back in, I don't know when it was, in the 70s or 80s. So that's where you develop interpersonal skills. And Sir Alex was the same. And this is not about older coaches. This is about coaches who are aware, because there's some young coaches who have a greatened or a heightened sense of awareness. But my point is, it only comes about through development, and very often the way to develop that is not in the academic setting alone. So some of the best, coaches that I've been around have actually had periods in their career where they've really, really struggled, or they've worked with lower level teams for a period. And ironically, it's in those moments that they developed the best interpersonal skills. And, a number of years ago, I was advertising for a role for a strength coach, and it was at a university in the US, and we get these resumes. We get a lot of resumes in, and I remember one of my assistants, and he, we had so many resumes to go through, but one of my assistants was laughing. He pulled out this resume, and he noticed a comment at the bottom where the person applying for the job had made reference to the fact that they had worked at, a fast food store, or it wasn't quite like, it wasn't a McDonald's or anything, but it was a local restaurant that was, and they had listed two of these jobs, and he was making fun of the fact that they had done this. But I actually made a point of bringing that person in to interview them, because if you today have had to work in the service industry, you've had to develop those interpersonal skills. That is exactly the skill set that is needed. Once you've got a certain level of knowledge in strength and conditioning or whatever it is, your ability to deal with people is what's going to differentiate you in the long run. So those skill sets are actually more important today than ever before. So I always look for people who have worked in the service industry, believe it or not.
And do you think that for a sports psychologist or a strength and conditioning coach, that actually having experienced, whether it's the service industry or actually having been a coach historically, that can help?
Yeah, and again, we shouldn't say, there are no such thing as absolutes. There are people who've grown up in environments where they've developed those skills. Yeah. But, one of the things that I think is really valuable about the service industry, when you have to, if you're working in a restaurant and the customer is always right, you have to listen to the customer. Sometimes the customer is wrong, but they're right. And you have to accept that. You have to read people. You have to interpret people. You have to watch body language. Developing that skill set in a submissive way is very, very important, because in time, yes, you will have to take control of a room or a group or whatever, but developing that self-awareness, I think, is so valuable for coaches in any area, but particularly in psychology, yes, of course, yeah. So it's really interesting the way the industry has changed now, I think.
Well, yeah, and just actually skipping forward in the book towards the area of teamwork and culture, you talk a lot about this. I love this part of the book where, you talked about how you talked about listening skills, communication skills, and how you dealt with Steven Gerrard, and how you persuaded him to start to take fish oil capsules, but it was about actually to convince him to take these capsules. You had to find a way in with him to find what his motivator would be.
Yeah, and I stumbled on this by accident, but the first part, of the story, I just take a moment. Nick Broad was originally hired as nutritionist at Chelsea, although his role grew. And I remember him telling a story. We were at an event in London. He was telling a story about how he was working with academy players, and this great academy player, he was trying to get them to take fish oil, and how he bumped into the guy a little while later and asked him, how was he getting on taking the fish oil? And the guy said he was taking it. Yeah, absolutely. Nick was a little bit skeptical and went, "Are you sure that the fish oil doesn't repeat or you don't burp?" And he said, "No, I'll wash it down with a can of Coke in the morning." And it was a wonderful learning lesson to me, that it's not simply about getting the person to do something, it's getting them to understand the whole picture and not compromise. So it actually would have been better. But then when it came to, at Liverpool, I was, listen, we've all done this. You walk into locker rooms with superstars and you've got literally seconds to make an impression.
Yeah.
And it's like speed dating. You've got to, sometimes before you open your mouth, they've made an impression. So you have to find how you can connect with these people. And with Stevie, it was a case that his kids were very important to him, and it was about presenting to him, speaking to him about how DHA is very important for child development and for brain development. And and by the way, this wouldn't be a bad thing for you to consider. There are a series of benefits that fish oil can help with you. So here are some, fruit gummy or gummy berries that have high levels of fish oil. And by the way, if you were to take a few in the morning, could be really helpful for you as well. And that's so it's about helping. You're trying to make people better and to help them be better, but it's understanding what people's needs and fears are, and just finding a way to communicate with them. Because I realized quite some time ago, it doesn't matter how smart I am, it doesn't matter what I know, who I've read, or what I've done. If I can't get it across to the player, to the coach, it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? And coming back to that coach piece or that sports scientist piece of having all this knowledge. For a sports scientist, it's going to university for 3, 5, 7 years, however long, and learning every single theoretical model out there. That's one thing, and nobody denies that can be useful, important. You need to have a knowledge base, don't you? But understanding the individual in front of you is so important. Building relationships is so important. Building that connection. And I love what you, coming back to this notion of winning habits, but relating that to connection, you talk about a little bit in your book about John Kavanagh, who was, maybe still is, and you can tell me whether he is, was Conor McGregor's coach. And you say how he was, when you observed John Kavanagh coaching, he was constantly asking players, what did you feel? Have you done this? What did you think of that? So it's almost coaching via questions, trying to get as much feedback as possible. I'm guessing, yes, to coach them skill, but in part to do that whilst developing a relationship, whilst learning about the player in front of him.
Yeah, it was fascinating watching him coach, because here's a guy who's obviously coaching, arguably the most famous guy on the planet at that stage, or sports star at the time. And so you would expect some level of slight arrogance or confidence. It was the complete opposite. The guy's on the mat with people who, and he just has an absolute genuine passion for the sport. But it was, what struck me was I was watching him coach, and I had read about John Wooden. And if John Wooden had been sitting there, he would have seen himself coaching. It was very much a case of, he was demonstrating things, but he was asking guys as they were doing it, what did they think? But what was most interesting about him was it was peer-to-peer coaching, because he was saying, okay, you did it this way. Why did you do it? Does that feel better for you? And the guy was going, yeah, I thought I could get my hip in there. And it was fascinating, because he clearly was a master of what he was doing, but he was, by asking somebody a question about why they were doing it in a different way, he was learning himself, but he was also making the fighters more aware of themselves, and so therefore they were inquiring more. I saw the very same thing in Canterbury with the Canterbury Crusaders, where Ashley Jones was the strength coach there. He would ask them about the weight training program he had written, and sometimes, like Ashley, I remember one day Ash was on the phone, and one of the guys was waiting for his program. Ash hung up, and the guy said that, an All Black said to him, Ash, I was thinking of just doing this and this many sets, this many reps. And Ashley goes, yeah, perfect. And he just made one small alteration. The guy went out and did it. So here's a player who's aware of his own body, who's aware of, and I said to Ashley Jones, and this is 20 years ago, I said, the greatest compliment I can give you is that your players can become very good coaches when they finish playing. So what I'm saying is that these great coaches educate, but they don't go out and teach and lecture to the player. They allow them learn through osmosis and through experience. That's the important difference. So it's not like, I stand up and try and throw as much information at players. You develop a relationship, and then they become knowledgeable and self-aware as their career develops.
As I listen to you, the thoughts going through my mind are coach as director of attention to build self-awareness. So great coaching isn't necessarily telling, and quite often it's not telling at all. It's asking questions to direct a player's attention onto the specific things, whether it's in their environment or onto themselves, to enable them to become more self-aware. That helps them become the best teacher of themselves, essentially.
Yes, and we touched on this earlier. You want to help. You said it earlier. You want players to be self-sufficient, and the best role of a teacher is actually to make themselves irrelevant, not unavailable. There's a difference. You want to be available, but you don't want to develop the Stockholm syndrome, or so to speak, where people are completely reliant on you. That's just disingenuous and it's unethical to begin with. But yes, you want to help develop people so they develop a skill set and an understanding. And we all go on a life journey, of learning and developing a better understanding of ourselves and how we respond to challenges, environments, the world. So it's helping people develop that. And there's a time, it takes time for the players and coaches to go on that journey. Some move a little bit faster, some will slow up from time to time. So it's complex.
Absolutely. One lesson that stood out at me for reasons of a random name in there was Kim Kardashian is your biggest opponent. What did you mean by that? Kim Kardashian is your biggest opponent.
Well, I hate to break everybody's heart, but I did not coach Kim Kardashian. So one of the very first books that I read a long time ago was called The Civil War by John Feinstein. There's a very famous story in it about a kicker who was a freshman, so he was in his first year at university. The Civil War is about the annual game between Army and Navy. It's a huge game, college game. And in the very last moments of the game, the kicker had an opportunity to score. He misses the kick. It's a wet day. He's a freshman. So anyway, after the game, the reporters say, listen, it was a very windy day. You're in your first year. The ball was wet. Why do you think you missed the kick? And the reply from the freshman kicker, I think it was a Navy kicker, was, no excuse, sir. And the reply made quite a lot of news at the time because the guy had a myriad of excuses he could have leaned on, but he said no excuse. And the reason for that is when you go to Annapolis, there are only 3 answers you can give for the first 6 weeks of training. Yes sir, no excuse. And that story stayed with me. It had a profound impact on me. When I would work with teams and coaches, and this is a Billy Connolly answer, but I am getting to a point. When I would work with coaches, yes, there were some areas I knew a lot about, and I would spend so much time reading and studying. But then I would not have the impact with the player, or I couldn't get the player to do a stretch or to do a program or to get buy-in. And so I came down, why was I not getting the result? Was I getting a result? Well, yes sir, no sir, or no excuse. So it obviously wasn't because I didn't know the space. It obviously wasn't because I didn't understand it. But I wasn't selling it to the player. I wasn't connecting with them. And so particularly when I was at the San Francisco 49ers, I realized I had this completely new audience of NFL players. I had to simplify the things I was trying to do, the recovery protocols in one particular instance that I was trying to sell. And so I completely changed everything I did and I worked backwards. These guys are used to being sold And I studied everything that Nike and Adidas and that MTV used to sell what they were selling to the very same audience. And I figured, okay, how do I sell recovery to the players? That was how I approached it. But it all started with this basic thing. It doesn't, like, am I getting the result, yes or no? It doesn't matter. I can sit there and moan about the fact that, oh, this is really complex and I've got cryotherapy and I've got this, that and the other. Listen, if the players don't buy in, it doesn't matter what you say or what you do.
And so how did you sell your wares? So
I'll give away one of my secrets. What I did was I used so imagine the players come in the very first day. Head coach wasn't there actually at the time, but the players come in and there's 100 odd players looking at this very, very white Irish guy standing in the middle, and they're waiting for me to fail. So I played a small video. It was a black screen, and out of the black screen walks Jay-Z, and the words slowly came up across the screen. I am not a businessman. I am a businessman. And so straight away, the players are going, okay, you have my attention. And I said, you're not football players. You're each individual businesses. You're just like Jay-Z. And you have to protect yourselves. And you have to recover in order to protect yourself. And this is what you're going to do tomorrow after practice. To recover, you're going to take the shake. And that became the catchphrase for the next 3 weeks, was take the shake. And straight after practice, every single player out of, I think it was 93, all but 3 players took a shake, a post-workout shake, which is, for a team that had never took any post-workout nutrition, before, was a phenomenal. But again, it all started with Jay-Z. In other words, I was competing against Kim Kardashian. I was competing against this, so I advertised what I did in a manner that could communicate with them. They didn't need to know that there was a 20-minute window and there was glycogen and protein synthesis and whey isolate. They could care less.
I often say to coaches, it's not about motivating players. It's about helping players motivate themselves. And it sounds to me like you did that there. And it reminds me of a section you've got in the management, facilitation and leadership part of your book, where you talk about there's no such thing as discipline. It's about inspiring self-discipline, which it sounds like you did there. You inspired self-discipline.
Yeah, so 2 things. One is that I disagree completely with every coach, nutritionist or whatever, who says, oh, you have to explain to the person why, the why, so that they'll know to do it. No. Some players will walk in and say, Fergus, what do I take straight after practice, if we're talking about nutrition, or what do I do? They just want to know what. Not everybody needs to know. In fact, if you stand up in front of a group of 100 players and start to tell them the what, you're going to switch off 50%, or just going to go, I'm not interested. Just tell me what to do. There are players who, it's like the wedding day, just tell me where to be and what to wear. Yep. Do you know what I mean? But there are some players who do want to know, but not everybody does. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, people talk about discipline, but it's really about self-discipline, because I've seen far too many organizations, particularly at the college level in the US in particular, where people are essentially being bullied into doing things. And it's the complete opposite of your philosophy, where you want to empower the players. And once you bully players and push them and abuse them into doing things, well, that's just, they're not learning anything. They're not doing anything willingly, to your point. But self-discipline is inspiring people to do things for a greater reason, to look after themselves. And that comes about through the player knowing that you actually care about them and you want to look after them, not just on the field, but beyond the field.
Well, people are complex, aren't they? They really are. And it's, for me, there's a difference between complexity and complication. Sport tends to be complicated. But people are complex. They work across layers. And I agree with you. I don't think you have to sell. I often hear coaches talk about, I've got to sell in the why, got to sell in the why. And there's so many players out there who will say, Dan, just tell me what to do. Fergus, just tell me what to do. And that in and of itself isn't incorrect, is it? It's just the way they are. And I think that's one of the toughest things about coaching, whether you're a coach, a sports coach, or whether you're an S&C coach or a sports scientist coach, if we can put those two together, or a psychological coach. It's helping individuals within a group of people, if we're talking about a team sport, especially in, say, the NFL, which you're mentioning there, which has a staff of 90 or so players. It's incredibly challenging, isn't it?
Yeah, and so that's not to say that you don't use opportunities to explain to players why you're doing things, and you do want them to know that, broccoli's a good food, for example, or whatever it might be. So that's not to say you don't, but it's to recognize that initially, not everybody wants to know, not everybody goes to the car dealership and asks, for the details of the engine and maybe where the spark plugs go and all of the minutiae. There's some people go to a car dealership and just want to know what colour is it, how fast does it get to 60, is it leather or fabric in the seats, or what colour leather can I pick? So it's understanding how to communicate with people and what their needs are, and over time you can help empower and educate them. But it's just simply understanding that, like you said, people are intricate, and everybody has different needs at different points in their time. But fundamentally, so long as you understand that your goal is to do no harm, and you're trying to help people, not the player, you're trying to help the person first, the player will always come second. The player will always be taken care of.
It's recognising that some people, I'll be one of those people who buys a car at the car dealership who would not want to know anything about the engine, I have to say. Yeah,
and there's two really important points about this. One is that, first of all, we only have a certain level of spare mental capacity.
Yeah.
So on any given day, you only have a certain amount of energy that you can afford to commit to it. It's not to say that you shouldn't know about this, but it's to know that, look, there's a certain amount of information that you need to know, that you can commit to learning new things. And by doing that, then you free up the ability to learn about, other things. So it's about just recognizing and knowing the relationship you have with people. So it's not a case that we're saying. The second point is coaches, sports scientists, psychologists, nutritionists, they need to recognize you are not a player. So your thirst and desire for knowledge and understanding is of a different nature than the player. The player needs to know, might want to know the why, but in a different way than you want to know. So just recognizing that you're not talking to the same person. They have a different level of intelligence, far beyond yours when it comes to the sport, but you're interested in understanding it for a different reason. So those are really, really important things, I think, for recognize there's a limit to what a player can take in, and recognize also that their why is different than your why.
Yeah. It makes me think, again, as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking about one of my consultancy positions. I can go off on one in terms of what I'm passionate about from a sports psychology perspective. And you know what? Ordinarily, players will heavily engage in it. They're usually really good, but sometimes they're just like, Dan, just stop talking. Just go away, stop talking. So it's understanding your players, right?
Yeah, and you give a presentation somewhere and you're looking and you just notice that you're just losing the audience. Well, brilliant. Figure out why. I look back on some presentations that I used to give, and I learned very, very quickly because I was a teacher. I was fortunate to have learned that, if you're losing the audience or eyes are drifting or they're not concentrating, look at what you're talking about. You're losing them, and there's a darn good reason for it. And that's why, keep going back to Kim Kardashian, there's two things. One is, first of all, if you're failing, are you failing or are you winning? Yes or no, sir. don't make an excuse. Figure it out. And usually it's Kim Kardashian use that as the why can Kim Kardashian create such interest and profile and get these guys' attention and you can't? Well, figure it out. That's who you're competing against.
And staying on that observation theme, interesting, you said you were a teacher, and as a teacher you're observing all the time, and so you build up an ability to observe, to see. And I'm conscious that you're not a sports psychologist, but certainly in 59 lessons, it's almost 59 psychology lessons here, and that's why I love the book so much. But I suppose a question that puts you on the spot slightly here, but you've been involved with some of the world's best teams. What does great psychology look like from a player? What does bad psychology look like? How would you categorise those two?
I used to say that I hate psychologists, and bear with me, because I think that psychology is omnipresent and arguably the most important. I hate saying things like most or making absolutes, but there is nothing that anybody does, nothing at all. Everything that you do has some psychological element to it. So let's say, for example, you're a psychologist at Juventus or Real Madrid, doesn't matter.
Yep.
So the player drives into, the player gets up in the morning, his wife is in a bad mood, whatever, her credit card bounced or whatever, so he drives to work. Breakfast, there was no breakfast, so he skipped breakfast, he drives into work. As he's driving out his lane, he's not concentrating because the wife's giving him a hard time, and he scratches the car against the gate. Now, he's damaged both the gate and his new Ferrari. He drives into work and he's irritable, traffic's slow, he gets there, the security guy fails to recognise his car, starts to jabber to him, he gets annoyed. He gets into the training facility. Look, anyway, he falls out with one of his teammates, the head coach has dropped him, 2 or 3, whatever, he has a terrible day. And then he arrives to you for a 20-minute session at the end of the day. It doesn't matter how good you are, you're not going to fix all of those issues in 20 minutes. On top of all, but my point is that psychology, the importance of supporting the lifestyle outside of, so family and friends, the importance of supporting everybody who interacts with the player, whether it's the security guard, the people in the cafeteria, the strength and conditioning coach who's going to spend 2 or 3 hours every single day with every player, whether it's the head coach. My point is psychology is so important, and it is omnipresent. That's why psychologists or whoever it is are so important. But so I would arguably, if I had a psychologist with a team, I would almost tell them, I don't want you to work with the player at all. I want you to impact the staff and become a force multiplier and come up with simple models. So I use simple psychological models. I'm not a psychologist, but I've had to, through necessity, come up with really simple models of profiling players by the errors they make. Are they spiritual, social errors? Are they emotional errors? Or are they cognitive errors? And helping and using those models with coaches and psychologists and mental skills coaches and social workers within the organizations to help try and support everybody. So that's why I think that it's so important, but it's really been done piecemeal, particularly in the UK. Now in the US, in some cases it's way worse. If I got to be careful. But there are with some universities, you've got some mental skills coaches who are basically have a social work degree, but you'll only see them end up talking to the famous person who would want to become the NFL quarterback. But when it comes down to helping the poor kid who's missed 2 drugs tests, who's struggling from a disadvantaged area of the States, they can't be found.
Yeah.
So it's really coming up with this holistic caring model that looks after the people who need it the most.
I love what you said there about psychology being omnipresent, and I think an important distinction needs to be made here, especially as somebody, this is me as a sports psychologist, and I recently wrote something. I was saying this to you off air. I recently wrote a piece saying, look, sports psychology is in row A, sports psychologists are in row Z. I don't think anybody who's a qualified sports psychologist or an experienced mental skills practitioner would say that we're the most important people. No, we need to be away from the limelight. We need to be in that row Z. Possibly occasionally coming down to row A and liaising with the right people at the right time, but scuttling back up to row Z pretty quickly. But I love what you said about it being omnipresent, because look, I agree with you, and I've got a little mission, Fergus, whereby I'm on a slight friendly war against any kind of four-corner model. So I'll get your thoughts on this in a second, and that's to really, I'm passionate about deconstructing that four-corner model. And if one was to say the top left is tech, tack, the top right is physical, the bottom left is psychological, the bottom right is social. Really, let's deconstruct that model. And actually, for me, the truth is that the psychosocial drive, so we might put the psychosocial underneath the technical, tactical and physical. I think the psychosocial drive those areas. Now, it's not to say that sports psychologist is the most important person. Of course I'm not saying that. But every single person, as you're saying there, has to be invested in what they're doing.
So in Game Changer, I called the four elements: tactical, technical, psychological, and physical.
Yep.
Co-actives. In that they all depend on each other. But because even yes, you could argue that. But if you take physical, for example, so if you take food and nutrition, if you go and have 4 cups of coffee, you're going to become irritable. It's going to be more and more difficult to manage any psychological input. So in other words, your wellness or your protocols, your psychological protocols are dependent on the foods that you eat. Are you eating acidic or alkaline foods? But vice versa, because if you're not in a calm state, you're not going to make good choices when you go to eat. The physical loading. So anyway, the point is none of these things exist in isolation. And it's that needs to be recognized so that you have a performance department that support each other so that you can understand and can influence, help. So you can help the strength coach be more effective by giving him basic profiling, psychological profiling tools that very simple things he can use in the weight room, and vice versa. The strength coach can tell you, hey, listen, Jimmy was in today, he seems a little bit tired, a little bit stressed, maybe you should have a word with him over lunch. That's the way it should work. It should be a holistic model. But most importantly, the people making the decision, whether it's the head coach, the football director, or whoever's in charge, they need to have an true experience, understanding and appreciation for the benefits of a psychological wellness model and understand the breadth of impact that it can have, not just on performance, but on lifestyle and leading to a sustainable career, long career for their players. That's what's most important that many coaches don't appreciate.
And it's interesting you talking about the psychosocial going through the organisation. I mean, you talk about in one section of the book Gilbert Anoka, who's not just a well-regarded but a world-renowned mental skills coach who works with the All Blacks, has done for many years, known as the Whisperer over there, and he talks about cultivating a systemic approach through several members of staff so that those staff members have that basic knowledge. That's what you're saying.
Absolutely, yeah, because here's the thing. So I'm not a psychologist, but if I were a psychologist, I would want to share a little bit of my skill with the nutritionist, with the strength coach, blah, 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 so they can help me do my job. Because it's only good. I've never been with more than one psychologist. and we've just, many people say, oh, it's really important, it's so important, but yet, you hear coaches talk about how important psychology is, yet they only have one psychologist themselves. Well, if it's not important, you'd have 5 of them because you've got 5 fitness coaches. You know what I mean? It doesn't make sense. Now, I believe, however, that for me, the future, and this is a longer conversation, my backroom team, I would have, say, 5 or 6 performance coaches. Everybody would be just called a performance coach.
Okay.
You would have 3 responsibilities. A primary responsibility might be psychology, strength and conditioning, nutrition, but your secondary responsibility would be one of the other things: rehab, psychology, nutrition, whatever it might be, so that everybody is completely responsible. We're all in the one lifeboat. We're all in the boat together. You are a performance coach. Yes, you've got your primary responsibility is psychology, but I also want to see you in the weight room supporting and helping the staff, because what happens is we've got these huge backroom teams that are just big backroom teams of silos where nobody wants to take responsibility. Everybody points it off, and so if we lose at the weekend, we all sit down in a meeting and go, well, it wasn't my fault because the guys are fit enough. We're still running at the end of the game. Psychologist goes, well, it wasn't my fault because they're really, really confident going out. Well, the medical guy goes, well, we didn't get any hamstring injuries, so it's not my fault. Listen, yes, sir, no excuse, sir. Did we win? We didn't win. Well, let's figure it out. And I use, this is another clip that I use with teams. It's from a terrible movie called The Rock with Nicolas Cage and Sean Connery. But there's an inappropriate line. But Sean Connery asks Nicolas Cage, who's defusing a bomb, is he going to defuse it? And Nicolas Cage gets frustrated and says, I'm doing my best. And Sean Connery's reply is, your best? Losers whine about their best. Winners go home and kiss the prom queen. He doesn't use the word kiss. But the point is, nobody cares whether you do your best or not. Because your best doesn't matter. It's did you get the result? And if you didn't get the result, let's figure out why and let's fix it. And let's keep improving bit by bit. But there's a problem where people just say, oh, well, I'm doing my job. Well, brilliant. You're just rowing. You're rowing, hard in one direction. Everybody else is rowing in the opposite direction. Let's problem solve together as a performance department. Let's move away from this egocentric, insecure a culture of insecurity where everybody's just complaining about everybody else. Let's solve these problems together as a performance team. That's one of the keys to. That's one of the most important keys to the All Blacks' success, and Gilbert Enoka will tell you that himself. And the other reason is they have a very small backroom team, which helps that functioning.
I love the idea of everyone being a performance coach. I really do, because the way you've explained that, I think I'm going to put my psychologist's cap on here, is you help everybody within the organisation have a bit of jargon here, an internal locus of control. So focus on themselves as the contributor to the overall outcome. They're attributing themselves, they're blaming themselves essentially. They're holding themselves responsible for the outcomes, for the performance, for the outcome.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's like spreading like a virus. You see, the other thing is that really what you're trying to do with your backroom team is you want to create a vision. I'm not a huge fan of goals or very specific goals because I think that if you've got a vision, a gross vision for the department, it helps align people better than being too specific in your goals. Or if you are going to pick goals, you need to be very, very careful about not making them too detailed. They have to be achievable, in other words, because if all of your goals are ones that you fail at, well then you're just reinforcing, it's just negative reinforcement, or it can become very disappointing, disillusioning. That can be the end result. But most importantly, with your staff or with players, look after the person. Look after the person first. Find out what's important to them. So if I've got a guy who's turning up to me to work for me day in, day out, and who's got 3 kids at home, and those are the pride and joy for him, the first thing I'll ask him every morning is, how are the kids? You know, how's Becky? How are the kids? I'll engage with them. I want to know that they're taken care of. Once we have that 5-minute conversation, and I know that they're safe, they're healthy, he'll do anything that he needs to do or for me, because he knows that at 5 or 6 or 7 or whatever time he'll get home to them. If I know that the most important thing in his life is safe and happy, then he can come to work, concentrate, and he can work for me or work with me, because I always say to people, I don't want you working for me, I want you to work with me. And that's a genuine concern. I want him to look after his family. I want him to get home to his family. And I want him so that he clearly, when he's out there working with our players, he is happy and truly engaged, and there's nothing distracting him. And if something does happen at home, or one of his kids is sick, hey, listen, get out of here, get straight out of here, I'll take this, I got this, or some of the other guys will take. Because when the time comes and I ask him to give me an extra hour later on, when one of the other guys is struggling, he won't even think twice about it. That's the way you have to start, but it does not start at work. It starts outside of work, because your work is not the most important thing. No matter what the CEO or the football director or the owner of the team says, not for the people who work for you or work with you.
I'm conscious that a lot of listeners to the Sports Site show operate at grassroots level. And so they're probably driving along in their car, or they're going for a run, however they listen to the podcast, and they're thinking, oh, you know what, this is great, this is awesome, really, really interesting. But on a wet Wednesday night, when I've got my group of players and we've got an hour on the AstroTurf, how on earth do I apply any of this stuff? And so, again, I suppose a question that slightly puts you on the spot, because I know you function at the elite level, but from your experience, from the conversations you've had with these incredible coaches, these incredible people at the elite level, from your thoughts on sports science, sports psychology, etc., how can grassroots coaches apply some of this stuff from a cultural perspective?
So brilliant. The first thing is, grassroots coaches don't appreciate the value and how important, or the advantage that they have, because I've worked at the highest level where you've got backroom teams, and you've got huge backroom teams where there are too many people to communicate with.
Yes.
At grassroots, you've got fewer people to communicate with in terms of coaching staff. You can create a linear model. You can create like a very simple vision for the practice. So a very, very simple way that I have used with grassroots is, we have a training plan. Sometimes the training plan is just simply written on the whiteboard 20 minutes before practice. But it was something I learned from Vitor Frade, Mourinho's coach, and it was in between them. But anyway, what we would do is, on the whiteboard and on the sheet of paper, we would have a column down the side. So horizontally, we've got each of the different drills or games that we're going to do. On the right-hand side, down the side, was a column that said emotion. And we used a very, very simple color code, green, amber, red, green, yellow, red, for what was the emotional intention for that drill. Green meant relaxed, learning, upbeat. So all of the coaches for that drill were to be upbeat, relaxed, not to say a lot, encourage the players, bum, bum, bum. If it was red, that meant, coaches, you can talk, you can be a little bit more forceful or a little bit more pointed, but we want more intention. Amber was mixed in between. And we tried to stay out of amber. We want either relaxed or we wanted red. And that was a very, very simple way there are two important reasons for it. One was to draw attention to the fact that psychology and the emotional load we're going to place on the kids is important. And secondly was to coordinate and create a cohesive message through all of the coaches for this particular drill. And then at the very, very top, the column went the whole way up to the top, and it was just one single colour, green, amber or red, for that particular practice day. So the philosophy for the day was either green, it was overall green or red. Why that is so important is, The kids who turn up to us, they've got lives, they've got stresses, strains. We can't always be in the red all of the time. Sometimes we need to give, you could have gone out and played the best team in the league, and we're practicing on Monday and we've been destroyed. Well, today's a green day. I want it upbeat, I want it light. I'm going to talk to the guys and say, guys, we're just beaten by a better team. Today we're going to have some fun. Each of these drills are going to be learning drills. There's not a lot of pressure on you. I want you to concentrate. That doesn't mean that we waste our time, but I'm not going to be in your ear forcing you. And we're going to have some fun here. We're going to relax, and then we're going to pick it up on Wednesday, and then we're going to go at it again next weekend. And we're playing the second best team in the league, and now we're going to really go at it again. But I'm not going to burn you out before next week's game. So that's just one very, very simple way of introducing psychology and very simple psychological model, if you will, or method into grassroots. But it is a very, very simple way to do it.
Love it. I love it. I want to close on a statement in the book you make that's, doesn't stand out too much, I would imagine, for the general readers, but I just want to get your thoughts on this, because I completely agree with it. The difference between winners and those who finish second is often the latter lose focus on what they can control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, very often what we end up doing is we see the things that we can't do, or we see the things that we can't get. We lose the ability, or we adopt like a negative approach to a problem that we have to solve. And I keep going back to, I'm probably going to sell more copies of It's a Civil War by John Feinstein than 59 Lessons, which is completely fine because he's a world-renowned writer. But that story had such a profound impact on me. Did you, yes sir, no excuse. Well, if you failed, there's no excuse. Let's figure out the solution to it. And you only really control your reaction to the world. The truth and reality is, if you're with a team and you play against Manchester United, Liverpool, Manchester City, you don't control the opponent. You only control yourself. You control how you react to whether they score. That's what we need to realize. And it's a bit late to bring up the Stoics, but in Stoic philosophy, essentially, you are in control of nothing. You're not even in control of your own body. You're not even in control of your own health. You're only in control of the psychological response to the world, to the weather, to traffic, to whatever happens. And it's that recognition gives you a sense of contentment and understanding that that's what you respond to. So you control yourself, if you will. You control how you respond. So listen, bad stuff's going to happen all the time, but you choose how you want to respond to it. So whereas other teams, and that's why I give the example in the book of the All Blacks, where the All Blacks, the greatest threat to the All Blacks is not playing England or not playing France or playing Ireland. Those are easy. Anybody can go out and play them because that's the biggest game. There's pressure. Where the real pressure is in playing a Zimbabwe or playing a lower level team where there's no pressure, because these guys are still going to come at 100%. But you're going to take your eye off the ball? No. You have to control and you have to play to your highest standard every single day. And that's what you control. You only control your own performance. And that's why the safest way to win is treat winning and losing the exact same way. Always play to your highest standard and never let complacency slip in.
It's interesting because from a performance perspective, control of controllables is within sports psychology is almost become a cliche now. It's because it's so correct 100%, and I sincerely believe in it. And a lot of my work is helping players scaffold down the specific responsibilities within their role to things that they can actually control. It's almost like a number one tool within the sports psychologist toolbox, if you like. It's an interesting one when you take more of when you come away from the pitch, where you're not just playing for 90 minutes or however long your sport lasts. And this idea of this stoic idea of being able to control yourself with regard to everything that happens to you. You can control your response. And it conflicts with me a little bit. I'm just saying this because I'd love to get your response, because obviously working at the highest of levels as you have, you must have, if you think of the 90 players on the staff at the San Francisco 49ers or wherever else you've worked, you've got so many different personalities. Over the 90 players have got different personalities. Some are more relaxed, some are more perfectionist, some are a little bit neurotic, a bit negative. Others are much more naturally optimistic, if you like. Some are very open. So you threw marginal gains at them, they'd lap that up. Yeah, love that. Yeah, more. And others are quite naturally closed-minded and cautious, but not necessarily a worse player for it. And I do have, I think, rife in the motivational guru literature is this idea of your attitude is a choice. I read on Twitter a lot. Attitude is a choice and effort is a choice. And I sort of scratch my head, and recently I've been writing a lot about this, is attitude a choice? Does the perfectionist really have a choice? For me, does the person who tends to be a bit more neurotic have a choice? Does somebody who's closed-minded have a choice? Do they need to have a choice? Do they want to have a choice? But there's no doubt that, and the way I describe it is that what something like mental skills does is it actually helps you have a bit more dexterity. It does actually give you choice. But I would contest the notion that attitude is a choice as such. I think it is confined to that 90 minutes on the pitch, if we're talking, say, about football, or that 80 minutes in a rugby match. And it has to be, Fergus, it just has to be. There is, you have to, as an elite performer, go out there with, I have to respond. But in everyday life, I do find it concerns me, this notion. I'm not so sure.
No, great point, and it's important to make the distinction between performance psychology and lifestyle psychology. Yeah. Not that I don't believe that they are necessarily separate. I think, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But my point is that it's very, very important that that's recognised. That yes, on the field, if players or performers, or whether it's a military operator, can't do that, then you've got a big problem. However, I would make the argument that one of the biggest challenges going forward, all sports, is that if it's at the FA, the Premier League, or whatever, if you don't begin now to put a psychological and lifestyle wellness program in place for your academy players now, society is not going to provide it in the way that it has done for previous generations. So we're getting to the stage now where kids are coming in so soon, and if you combine that with the fact that they're coming in so early, and social media now is creating this artificial influence on kids. My point is that they're not being exposed to the chaotic, rough and tumble lifestyle to build up mental resilience that they would have done playing on streets, whatever, years ago or whatever that was. So it's very, very important to do that. The second thing is that with these, in life, you're right. In some cases, you have not as, or controlling your response is more difficult, but everybody needs some kind of model or wellness model, psychological model for understanding life and understanding what happens. That model can be spiritual, it can be religious, or it can be influenced largely by that. Yes. It's never going to be exclusively one of those. But if you don't have a model, then you've got a bigger problem. And that's why this, to me, sports psychology, performance psychology is very, very, very important. Yep. But to me, the future is developing a life model, because there are so many people who nowadays are moving away from religion, moving away from faith, which did provide a psychological model for them, a basis for a model which they don't have now, and that's very, very important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Well said. Fergus, awesome stuff. Really enjoyed this conversation. I could go on for the next couple of hours, but I'm mindful of your time. I enjoyed 59 Lessons immensely, and as I mentioned earlier, it's just one of those books that you can dip into all the time. I know that people will want to get in contact. So how can people follow your work? How can they purchase 59 Lessons and Game Changer? And
the easiest way is just to follow me on Twitter, and it's just at Fergus_Connolly, or go to fergusconnolly.com, and 59 Lessons is on Amazon. And like I said, listen, I just wanted to share the stories and thank a lot of people who've helped me. Like I said at the very beginning, the world's greatest performance thief, and I've just been fortunate for so many people.
Well, we're all standing on the shoulders of giants, which
absolutely
I think is a quote that you mentioned in the book. So absolutely. Look, Fergus, thank you so much for joining. It was absolutely superb, and I hope you, the listener, enjoyed that podcast as much as I did. If you did, please do get in touch via Twitter, via Facebook, through my website, danabrahams.com. Let me know what you thought. If you've got any suggestions at all with regard format, future guests, then please do let me know. Well, I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.